Soft sunlight slipped through the thin slats of the blinds, casting a warm golden hue across the oakwood floor, like the morning was offering one last moment of tenderness before the world began to spin. In a small but tidy third-floor apartment, Officer Sarah Collins stood before a mirror, fastening the final button on her ceremonial police uniform, a deep navy ensemble with a meticulously polished badge gleaming at her chest. The uniform fit snugly on her lean, hardened frame, shaped by years of fieldwork and sleepless nights. Today, she was to be honored alongside the most extraordinary partner she'd ever known, Max, the K-9 who had stood by her side through every life-and-death operation, every mission where the line between survival and loss was razor-thin. But something was off. Sarah frowned slightly when she noticed Max's reflection in the mirror. The Belgian Malinois sat upright behind her, his sleek dark brown and black coat glowing softly under the morning light. But his ears weren't perked up with their usual alertness. They were reacting to something unseen. He didn't move, whimper, or wag his tail. He was utterly still, like a living statue, amber eyes wide, unblinking, fixed on the front door. Those eyes weren't just watching. They were warned. Turning slowly, Sarah approached Max. She knelt beside him, her hand slipping instinctively into the familiar softness of his neck fur. His body tensed beneath her touch, muscles twitching like he was ready to spring into battle. "What is it, old boy?" she whispered, her voice low but tight, a pulse of worry already rising in her chest. After more than 5 years together in the field, Sarah had learned to read the silent language only a genuine bond with a K-9 could teach. Every growl, every turn of the head, and every subtle tremor could signal danger. She was about to stand when the phone rang. Unknown number. No caller ID. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice crackled through the line, deep and hoarse as if muffled by cloth. "Officer Collins, they're watching you." Sarah froze. "Trust no one, especially not the ones you think you can." Then the line went dead, leaving behind a silence so heavy it seemed to hum in the air. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. She looked at Max, still unmoving, still staring at the door. And she knew. He had sensed it before the call ever came. A breeze fluttered through the window, rustling the geraniums on the balcony. But inside that room, nothing felt ordinary anymore. This was supposed to be a day of glory, of applause and commendation. But more than ever, Sarah felt it in her bones. Today would not be like any other. Today she would be forced to choose between protocol and instinct, between orders and trust. And that trust, she knew, had always lived in Max. In his eyes now, there was no longer just tension. There was the clear signal of a sixth sense. The real fight hadn't started yet, but it was close. And in that frozen moment, as Max's gaze stayed pinned to the door like he was seeing something no human eye could catch, Sarah found herself pulled back to a memory. A stormy afternoon just a month ago, when she and Max had made history for the Atlanta Police Department, but had also stumbled to the edge of something darker, something she knew wouldn't end quietly. That day, they had been patrolling the old industrial district on the city's south side, a zone long dubbed a legal dead spot, filled with abandoned warehouses, derelict containers, and a web of nameless roads criminals navigated like a maze. Sarah still remembered the heat rising in waves from the cracked asphalt, the stench of old oil, and the eerie silence that made her skin itch. She had been half considering cutting the patrol short when Max, resting behind the driver's seat, suddenly bolted upright, body taut like a drawn bow, muzzle pointing forward, a low whimper escaping his throat as his amber eyes scanned every shadowed corner. Sarah immediately slowed the car and followed his gaze. Tucked behind a row of rusted containers was a warehouse with no number. No cars, no lights, no guards. It looked forgotten. But Max didn't think so. He gave a sharp whine, ears pricked, then began scratching at the window, a behavior he rarely showed unless something was seriously off. Sarah didn't hesitate. When Max acted like this, it was never a false alarm. Gun drawn, vest secured, earpiece in place, she and Max approached the warehouse. The side door's paint was peeling, the lock rusted, but the dust around it had been disturbed. Subtle, but telling. She signaled Max to check, and he immediately lowered his body, gliding along the wall like the trained soldier he was. Inside, a wave of chemical stench hit them. Acetone, ether, methamphetamine. Max had been trained for this. Sarah called for backup. Within 10 minutes, the task force arrived. What followed was organized chaos. Gunshots echoed through narrow aisles stacked with crates. Figures darted through shadows. Smoke and sweat filled the air as radios screamed and dogs barked. Max stayed glued to Sarah's side. He led her past a rotting wood panel in the far corner. Beneath it, a hidden tunnel to a basement packed with the largest drug cache ever seized by their department. But the drugs weren't all. There were transport maps, lists of fake distribution hubs, and worst of all, a dossier naming money laundering businesses and the officials connected to them. That was the first time they learned of the organization behind it all, Los Serpientes, the Serpents, a transnational gang known for brutal tactics, a web of networks, and their deep infiltration of law enforcement. The files pointed to a leader known only as El Silencio, the Silent One. No photo, no identity, but allegedly able to command operations remotely through a militarized communication system. The key evidence was hidden in a hard drive. Max sniffed out from a pile of discarded files, a small device carrying a world of darkness no one had yet dared unlock. The operation ended with 37 arrests, nearly $50 million in contraband seized, and Sarah and Max credited with breaking open the heart of a criminal empire. But while others celebrated, Max did not. He lay by the exit, ears high, eyes locked ahead, like he knew the nightmare wasn't over. Now, back in their sun-lit apartment, that same look was in his eyes again. The stillness, the tension, the shallow, precise breath. It was exactly like 3 weeks ago, but this time Sarah's instincts whispered something colder. The enemy wasn't just out on the streets anymore. It had slipped inside the place she called home. Just as the thought of a shadowy force creeping into her life passed through her mind, Max suddenly sprang to his feet as if an electric current had jolted through his body. He didn't bark. He didn't rush to the door like he usually would. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately, toward the window. Ears high, nose twitching, as if tracking a scent he knew all too well, but didn't welcome. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his throat, long and deep, like it was unearthing a memory Sarah had never witnessed. She stepped toward him, gently pulling aside the white curtain to peer down at the narrow street running alongside the apartment building. Beneath the shade of a drooping willow, across the sidewalk, a tall, lean figure in a dark jacket leaned casually against a utility pole. His head was tilted slightly as if checking a phone, but beneath the brim of his cap, his eyes were locked, unmoving, pointed directly at her apartment. At first, Sarah felt confused. There was something hauntingly familiar about that stare. Not just the coldness of it, but the way it didn't flinch, didn't pretend, as though the gaze itself was intentional, not spying, but sending a message. Then the man lifted his head, and sunlight hit his face just enough to reveal the sharp, angular features of someone she'd only seen in old files. Someone spoken about like a ghost who'd been erased from the force, Victor Ramirez. Once considered one of the most gifted K-9 handlers the department had ever seen, Ramirez had been especially known for his bond with Max, back when Max was still young, fierce, and nearly impossible to train. They were a legendary duo on high-risk missions, until one covert operation 4 years ago shattered everything. The official report claimed Ramirez disobeyed orders, putting Max in danger to pursue an unauthorized target. Max was gravely injured, left behind in a warehouse that exploded minutes later. Ramirez vanished before backup arrived. His file was closed, his name purged, and the only trace of him left was in scattered conversations among veterans, spoken with a mix of regret and resentment. Sarah had heard the story from trainer Martinez, the same man who later paired her with Max. Martinez told her it had taken months for Max to trust again. Every time he heard the heavy, military-style footsteps, Max would turn his head away. That once, when shown a photo of Ramirez during a file review, Max growled, not out of hatred, but from the ache of an old wound. And now, there he was, standing in the morning light like a ghost from the past, resurrecting everything time had failed to bury. Max didn't bark. He didn't lunge, but his body trembled, caught in the clash between instinct and memory, between duty and something once called love. Sarah knelt beside him, eyes fixed on Ramirez, her hand gently stroking the fur at Max's neck, where his heartbeat was racing wildly. She knew, for Max, this wasn't just the return of a betrayer. It was the return of a pain that had never healed. 10 seconds later, Ramirez turned and walked slowly down a nearby alley without once looking back. No words, no gestures, but the way he walked, the unhurried, deliberate gait, was a challenge in itself. He knew she'd seen him, and he wanted her to know the game was about to begin. Sarah tightened her grip on Max's leash. A chill ran through her spine. Ramirez wasn't there by chance. He had come to warn or to test. And in Max's eyes, she saw the one truth that mattered most. He hadn't forgotten. Not out of vengeance, but because of a bond once formed, and then mercilessly broken. Now, that betrayal was returning, and it was more dangerous than ever. Max licked her hand gently, a silent comfort. But Sarah knew this wasn't the end of an old nightmare. It was the start of a new storm, and this time, she and Max would be at its center. Even after Ramirez had vanished down the alley, Sarah stood frozen at the window, her hand stroking the fur at Max's nape, trying to steady both him and herself. He hadn't said a word, yet his presence had activated every instinct she'd ever relied on. To outsiders, he might have been just a disgraced ex-officer, but to Max and her, he was the shattered piece of a past that had never truly healed, now returning like a dark omen for what was to come. She glanced at the clock. It was time to leave. The medal ceremony couldn't be delayed, at least not according to the schedule. But inside, a heaviness clung to her chest like morning fog that refused to lift. The black SUV glided smoothly down the boulevard, but the silence inside was taut. Max sat in the back seat, head low, eyes fixed out the window. Sarah noticed the signs. He wasn't resting, wasn't yawning, wasn't nudging her for affection like usual. Max was on alert, not in the way he was during training, but in the way only battle-hardened warriors are when they know the front lines are near. Atlanta Police Headquarters loomed ahead, a fortress of glass and steel towering over the city's heart. Today, the plaza out front was a vision of order. Flags waved, white chairs stood in neat rows, the podium was draped in blue with the K9 emblem glinting in the sun, and the sound system echoed ceremonial music. Everything looked perfect, perhaps too perfect. As soon as they stepped out, Max tensed. No barking, no lunging, just subtle movements, a tilt of the head, a lick of the lips, a gaze sweeping over each stranger in the crowd. It was the silent language Sarah knew too well. Max had picked up something, and it wasn't good. Inside the main lobby, she spotted Captain Rodriguez speaking with senior officers. His posture was as solid as ever, his silver hair neat, his demeanor calm, the kind of man who didn't rattle easily after 2 decades in the field. But when his eyes met Max's, his familiar smile faltered. He stepped over, eyes flicking from Max to Sarah. "He all right?" he asked, low. Sarah shook her head. "Not like usual. He's been alert all morning, and I saw Ramirez." Rodriguez's face darkened. "You're sure?" "More sure than I've ever been." He was silent for a moment, then gave her shoulder a firm pat. "Then trust Max. We'll keep our eyes open. A voice rang from behind, clear and steady. "If anything's going to go down today, Max will know first." It was Maya Torres, the bomb disposal tech and one of Sarah's closest allies, not just for her skill, but for the steel in her spine. Dressed in her plain tactical uniform, hair tied back, gloves already on, Maya offered a soft smile, though her eyes were sharp. "I've swept the entire area. Cameras, exits, service staff lists. Everything's clean, on paper." Sarah glanced at her, then at Max, who was already moving. Nose to the ground, body tight, ears twitching as if listening to the building's heartbeat. "On paper," she murmured, "is exactly what the cartel knows how to manipulate." As they entered the main hall, the atmosphere slowly shifted from excitement to something unreal. The greetings, the smiles, the scattered applause. It all felt like a stage play, meticulously choreographed. Sarah scanned the room, recognizing familiar faces. Officer Jenkins, Major Howard, even Commissioner Hayes, people she had once believed she could trust. But today, as Max's gaze lingered on each one of them, then moved on, almost as if he no longer recognized any of them, a realization sank in. Maybe among these so-called comrades, someone was wearing a mask. On stage, the cameras had started their test runs. Reporters adjusted their equipment for the live broadcast. Outside, the military band was tuned and ready, each note evoking memories of ceremonies she had witnessed before. But this time, there was no sense of pride, no anticipation. Only Max, her steadfast companion, eyes fixed on the stage area, never looking away. Sarah felt something slowly coil inside her chest. Not pride, not quite fear either, but something deeper. A primal instinct whispered to her. The ceremony wasn't meant for them. It was a curtain masking something waiting to detonate beneath the surface. And if Max was right, then that curtain was about to be torn wide open. As Sarah's final step touched the marble leading into the grand hall, where the ceremony was moments from beginning under glowing lights and solemn music, Max came to an abrupt stop. It was as if the ground before him was no longer safe. Sarah felt it instantly, the slight but firm tug on the leash as her loyal K9 partner took half a step back, his body rigid, ears upright, eyes locked on the entrance like he was facing something invisible. The crowd buzzed with chatter and flashing cameras, no one noticing the subtle shift. No one but Sarah. She knew better. With Max, there were no minor irregularities, only silent alarms disguised as stillness. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just stood, breath quickening, and from deep in his throat came a low, steady growl, dense and rumbling, like thunder just beneath the surface. Quiet enough only she could hear it, loud enough to chill her blood. She'd heard that growl only twice before. Once when Max discovered an IED hidden in an elementary school locker, and again before they raided Los Serpientes' warehouse, the one holding $50 million worth of narcotics, and the documents that led to dozens of arrests. Now that sound was back, in the middle of a sunny morning, beneath stage lights, just seconds before Max was meant to receive a Medal of Honor. Sarah knelt beside him, tightening her grip on the leash and pressing her forehead gently against his, trying to feel his heartbeat through his thick coat. She could sense every muscle beneath her hand drawn tight like steel cable, every subtle tremor a sign of a battlefield waiting to open. Max didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the path ahead, the aisle between the chairs leading to the stage. But to him, that wasn't a walkway of glory. It was the fault line between safety and death. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes scanning forward. That's when she started noticing the details, tiny things that didn't sit right. A ceiling speaker recently replaced, a surveillance camera adjusted from its usual angle, and unfamiliar event staff, people Maya hadn't cleared. One of them was carrying a tray of drinks toward the VIP table, hands awkward, but his gait, too smooth, too perfect. The kind of detail only someone with years of tactical training would spot. Behind her, heavy footsteps approached. Captain Rodriguez appeared, holding the silver microphone she and Max were meant to use during the ceremony. "Collins? Everything all right?" he asked quietly, noticing Max frozen in place. "What's wrong with him?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She rose to face him, her expression no longer hesitant. "Max isn't wrong, sir. He's never been wrong. And that growl, that's his final warning before something goes very, very bad." Rodriguez stepped back slightly, clearly uneasy. Before he could respond, Max growled again. Louder this time. Longer. Two young officers near the entrance turned at the sound. Sarah leaned in quickly and whispered, "I saw Ramirez this morning. Outside my apartment, watching. That wasn't a coincidence." Rodriguez's face hardened. The lines around his eyes deepened. His fingers moved toward the emergency button on his shoulder radio. "You think something's in here?" "I don't know," Sarah said, eyes still on Max. "But Max does. And if he won't step in, then neither will I." Just then, a woman's voice called out from the stage, "Officer Sarah Collins and Canine Max, please come forward." Applause erupted like waves breaking, and every gaze turned their way. Sarah swallowed hard. Max didn't move. She could feel it, an unnatural tension in the air, like someone was waiting for a cue. Then Max's eyes shifted, from the stage to the right side of the hall, where a man in a server's uniform was bending over a drink basket. Max's stare sharpened like a spear, intense, unwavering. A second later, his body coiled as if ready to launch. Sarah whispered, no longer uncertain, "Something's waiting to explode." And in the unspoken understanding between handler and dog, they both knew. If they walked forward now, they weren't walking toward applause. They were walking straight into a trap. In the very second that every face in the hall turned toward the stage, where Sarah and Max's names had just been called to thunderous applause, a sharp, piercing bark tore through the air. "Maximum!" The sound froze the room. The ceremonial music cut out abruptly, as if the instruments themselves had sensed something was wrong. Sarah barely had time to register the leash snapping from her grip before Max launched forward like a missile, aiming directly at the server pushing a gleaming silver cart down the aisle. The man wore standard event staff attire: white shirt, dark slacks, black gloves, and a surgical mask, identical to dozens of others. He wasn't fast, wasn't slow, just moved with a rhythm too flawless. Robotic. Anyone else might have missed it. But Max didn't miss. He smelled it, felt it, the breath pattern, the stillness beneath the calm, the behavior just slightly off, a warrior's instinct sharpened by years in the field. Sarah reacted instantly. She sprinted after Max, pulling a concealed handgun from beneath her dress uniform and shouting, "Clear out! Everyone get down!" But the crowd froze, caught between disbelief and panic, unsure whether this was real or a performance. Max didn't wait. He leapt, his body a blur, and hit the man just as he bent over to retrieve the large coffee urn. The cart toppled. The urn hit the floor. The lid popped open. And instead of coffee beans or steam, what lay inside was a compact device. Wires, lithium batteries, a digital screen flashing in red. A scream rang out from one of the younger officers. "Bomb! It's a bomb!" Instantly, the event shattered into chaos. Chairs fell. People screamed. Footsteps thundered across the marble. Max clamped his jaws around the man's wrist, slamming him to the floor. Sarah pinned the other arm behind his back, her voice drowned by Max's growl and the suspect's grinding teeth. Frustration, not fear. He hadn't expected to be stopped, especially not by a dog. But his eyes were calm, cold, as if he was still waiting for something else to happen. "Bomb squad! We need the bomb squad now!" Sarah barked into her radio, her voice tight with adrenaline. Rodriguez rushed in from the opposite end, Maya Torres close behind, face pale, eyes laser-focused. "Let me handle it," she said, kneeling beside the device. "This isn't amateur. It's rigged with remote triggers. If Max hadn't intercepted 2 more steps, and this whole room would have gone up." Sarah clenched her fist at those words. She turned to Max, still holding his ground, hackles raised, eyes locked on the suspect's chest like he expected a second weapon. And then, Sarah remembered the phone that had fallen from the man's pocket. A message on the screen. "He'll come after. Don't blow the cover." He. After how long? Her head snapped up, scanning the crowd as SWAT began evacuating people. In the reflection of a tall glass window at the far end of the hall, she saw a figure. Tall, gloved, wearing a long coat, moving slowly toward the back exit. Not running, just walking, like someone who had done what he came to do or was about to. Sarah squinted, and her breath caught as the light struck the man's face. Victor Ramirez. Every piece fell into place. He had once been a top K-9 handler. He knew the inner workings of every security protocol, every bomb squad reaction pattern. He didn't need to sneak in. He only had to wait. Sarah turned to Rodriguez, her voice low and sharp as a blade. "We're not done. There's another device, and this time it's not here to warn. It's here to kill." Max looked up at her, understanding in his eyes. His tail was still. His gaze, intense, focused, ready. Sarah gripped the leash. "Let's go, old friend," she whispered. "There's one more out there in the dark. And this time, we're not letting him get away." The last sound Sarah heard before the entire hall slipped into high alert wasn't the wail of sirens, or the pounding footsteps of the SWAT team, or even panicked screams. It was a deep, grinding growl, like stone scraping down a cliffside, rising from Max's throat. At that moment, the K-9 was no longer just a hero who had saved hundreds of lives. He had become a living compass, guiding her through a maze of threats hidden beneath the facade of ceremony and honor. Kneeling beside the overturned coffee urn, Sarah's palm trembled slightly from the adrenaline, but her eyes were sharp, focused like a blade unsheathed in combat. Inside the urn lay a silver metallic sphere, crisscrossed with red, green, and yellow wires, and a palm-sized circuit board blinking rhythmically. Maya Torres, now at her side, pulled a diagnostic tool from her gear bag, removed her gloves, and connected it to the signal port. "No immediate detonation signal," she muttered, frowning. "But this design is beyond anything I've seen before. This isn't some amateur. This was built by someone trained." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the man still pinned to the floor, his wrists cuffed behind his back. But his gaze was unwavering. On the contrary, he looked almost satisfied, as if this takedown was only one piece in a much larger plan. "Who sent you?" Sarah asked, her voice low and steady, like a sniper's breath. The man smirked, paused a beat, and then said softly, a whisper heavy as stone, "I'm just the opening act." Max growled again, stepping forward, gaze locked on every twitch of the suspect's body. Sarah lowered her voice further, staring straight into his eyes. "How many?" This time it wasn't a question, it was a command. The man spat a little blood, then gave a half smile. "You didn't think we came for just one show, did you? You destroyed everything we built 3 weeks ago. Today is our reply. One bomb? That's just petty." Sarah held her breath. "Where's the next one?" she hissed. He didn't answer, just muttered a short phrase in Spanish, some kind of code, maybe a victory chant. "Translate that!" she barked at Maya. But before Maya could respond, Max had already moved. He turned sharply and sprinted toward the rear corridor leading to the technical area and staff quarters. Sarah didn't hesitate. She ran after him, heart pounding, and Rodriguez followed, pistol drawn. As they rounded the corner, a dim light glowed from the tech room. No one was supposed to enter that space after 8 a.m. Max darted along the wall, nose to the floor, and stopped at the threshold. He pressed his snout to the tile, then dropped into a low crouch. The familiar signal Sarah had seen dozens of times on real missions. She carefully pushed the door open and froze. On the sound equipment table sat a large metal box, secured with straps and marked with a small skull symbol. A wire ran from the box directly into the main speaker system. Below it, a digital countdown ticked mercilessly. 001422, 001421. "Oh my God," Rodriguez whispered, slapping his hand to his headset. "We've got a second device. Repeat, second device. Timer is active." Maya arrived within minutes, her face pale the moment she saw the setup. "They timed this to go off with the first bomb, right when the crowd would be evacuating," she said quickly, breathing hard. "One goes off in the main hall, people flee, and this one blows when they think they're safe." A chill swept through Sarah. Faces flashed in her mind. Children waving flags, families watching the ceremony. Every one of them was a reason to act. She looked at Max, sitting motionless, eyes locked on the box, not barking, not moving, as though even a shift in posture might set the world ablaze. Maya crouched beside the bomb, inspecting the wiring. Her face tightened. "It's a dual-frequency radio receiver. If we screw up the order..." She trailed off. "It'll blow instantly." Sarah clenched her jaw, thoughts racing. But Max, amid the suffocating tension, turned and looked at her. Calm, steady. His eyes seemed to say, "Don't be afraid. We've walked through hell before. We can do it again." And in those eyes, Sarah found resolve. She nodded to Maya. No room for error. Too many lives at stake. 001206. Time doesn't wait, and Max had never let anyone pay the price for hesitation. The timer in the tech room continued its cold countdown, each second a reminder of the danger still looming, when Max suddenly left his post and bolted down the west corridor without a single command from Sarah. It was as if the loyal dog had sensed something beyond the physical, a strange metallic scent, a subtle subsonic vibration, or maybe just the faintest shift in air pressure. But for Max, every tiny tremor could be a sign of disaster. Sarah immediately followed, her legs moving before her mind caught up, the exhaustion in her muscles drowned by the rush of urgency. Captain Rodriguez was right behind her, his sidearm gripped tight, sharp eyes scanning every corner of the hallway, now drenched in the red flashes of the emergency lights. The west exit had become the main evacuation route. Groups of civilians, officers' families, children, and honored guests were being escorted by security, believing they were moving to safety. But only Max understood the brutal truth. Danger was waiting right where they trusted safety the most. Max skidded to a halt, paws slipping slightly on the cold tile. His nose pressed low against a stainless steel cart near the exit door. It looked completely ordinary, covered with a clean white cloth, holding a few water jugs and plastic cups, just like the carts seen at every typical event. But Max knew better. He began to growl, back arched, tail stiff, a low snarl rumbling deep in his throat like a warning bell only Sarah could decipher. She slowed her steps, sweat slicking her palms, eyes fixed on the cart as if it might detonate with one wrong move. Crouching low, she carefully lifted the edge of the cloth. And there it was, the second bomb. Larger, more sophisticated than the first. Barely concealed, as though its creator never feared discovery before it was too late. Beneath the metallic casing, a tangle of wires connected to a dual trigger system, motion and pressure sensors designed to detonate if too many people rushed the area at once. But what made Sarah's blood run cold wasn't just the construction. It was the location. Placed squarely in the emergency exit, the exact point where the crowd was now beginning to surge, spurred by screams echoing from the main hall. This wasn't just a bomb. It was a trap, deliberately set to funnel chaos into death. Sarah hit her radio, her voice hoarse with tension. "Second device confirmed, west emergency exit, motion and pressure sensors. Bomb squad required immediately. Halt all evacuations this way. I repeat, halt all west exit evacuations." Maya responded instantly. "On our way. Maintain distance. No vibration, no impact near that zone." Sarah nodded, eyes on Max, who remained frozen like a sentinel at the gates of hell. "Good boy, Max," she whispered. "You've saved us again." 2 minutes later, Maya and the bomb team arrived, armed with pulse disruptors and high-frequency signal jammers. Everyone worked in total silence. The only sounds were the soft beeps of detectors and their tight, shallow breathing beneath sealed masks. Sarah stepped back a few paces, hand resting gently on Max's back, grounding herself in the steady rise and fall of his breath. Maya exhaled slowly, sweat tracing a line from her temple to her chin as she disarmed the timed detonator, disconnected the pressure sensor, and jammed the radio control signal. The screen flickered green. Deactivated. The entire team nearly collapsed in relief. Device neutralized. No third link detected. We're temporarily secure. Maya looked up, her voice still shaking but firm. If Max hadn't found it in time, we could have lost hundreds. Sarah dropped to her knees and hugged Max tightly, ignoring the sweat and grime on his fur and vest. Well done, Max. You're not just K9. You're the trust of this entire city. Rodriguez approached, gun still in hand, but his gaze carried sincere respect. We could have been taken out in one devastating blow, if not for him. But even as the tension eased, a cold wind seemed to brush the back of Sarah's neck. She remembered the suspect's chilling words. I'm just the opening act. The bombs were disarmed, but the one who orchestrated them had yet to show his face. Max shifted, ears alert, eyes locked on the far end of the dim hallway. Sarah rose slowly, hand tightening around the grip of her gun. This fight wasn't over, because the serpent, like all serpents, would not stop until its head was severed at the root. And Sarah knew, with Max at her side, they would make sure it never slithered away again. When the second bomb was neutralized and the chaos began to quiet, even as footsteps still echoed down the hallway and orders crackled relentlessly through the radio, time seemed to pause for a fleeting moment. In that stillness, Sarah, Rodriguez, and Maya stood silently together, watching Max sit calmly by the cart like a veteran soldier who had just fulfilled his duty. What Sarah felt in that instant went far beyond gratitude or admiration. It was something deeper. She knew. The calm bravery Max had shown today wasn't instinct. It was the result of a long journey, one that began in a very different place, on a very different day, the day they first met at the Atlanta Police Department's K9 training facility. It had been a drizzly autumn morning. Cold winds blew through rows of tin-roofed kennels, rattling the weathered K9 Training Division sign. Back then, Sarah was still a rookie. Green, untested in the field, but with near-perfect theory scores that made her stand out. She stepped into the training yard in her crisp new uniform, her eyes filled with expectation. Before her were 5 Belgian Malinois, lined up in kennels, all bred for elite service. Quick, intelligent, but notoriously hard to handle. Trainer Martinez, who ran the center, approached with an old notebook and a half-playful, half-challenging smile. Today's a fateful one, Collins. Let's see if any of them choose you. Sarah smiled and began walking past each kennel. The first few dogs leapt up, tails wagging, barking lightly as she approached. But when she reached the final kennel, partially hidden behind a withered plant, she saw a different dog. He didn't leap or bark. He just stood there, still, head tilted slightly, amber eyes studying her carefully, almost as if weighing her every move. That's Max, Martinez said, his tone dropping. He's already been assigned to 2 officers. One quit, said he was too stubborn. The other got injured during a poorly run session. Since then, Max hasn't approached anyone. Sarah didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid, because in Max's gaze she saw something almost human. There was caution, distance, but also intelligence and depth. She didn't call out or offer a hand. She simply sat down by the kennel, silent, and waited. Minutes passed. Max didn't move, but he didn't look away either. Then, slowly, he walked to the edge of the kennel, sat directly across from her, and dipped his head. Like a quiet hello. Martinez froze, stunned. My God, that's the first time in 8 months he's approached someone on his own. Sarah smiled softly. No words were needed. She knew Max had chosen her. Not because she was the best, but maybe because she didn't try to force him into a mold. She let him be who he was. From that day forward, their partnership began. not like any other trainer-dog pair. Sarah didn't confine Max to dry lesson plans. She learned his language. The slight head tilt at unfamiliar sounds, the scratch of his paw when he sensed hazardous chemicals, the low nasal whimper when he detected shifts in air pressure. And Max, once labeled uncontrollable, slowly became her irreplaceable partner, one who could understand her with just a glance and sense danger before humans even registered it. Now, in the cold hallway, still thick with gunpowder after a tense rescue, Max sat exactly as he had the first day, calm, grounded, quiet, and without demand. Sarah looked down at him, her heart full of silent emotion. In all their years together, Max had never betrayed her trust, not once. And today, during what was supposed to be just a medal ceremony, he had saved hundreds of lives, not out of command, but from the loyal heart of a warrior once rejected, who chose love instead. And in that moment, Sarah understood more clearly than ever. No medal they were about to receive could ever fully represent what Max had sacrificed. For trust, for friendship, and for the quiet pride of a soul that had never asked for praise, only a place to belong. Max remained there beside the cart where he had uncovered the second bomb, his posture steady like a pillar in the receding storm of chaos. Sarah gently bent down and placed a hand on the back of his neck, feeling the tension still lingering in his lean but powerful frame. That touch wasn't just gratitude. It was a silent connection between two souls who had once stood on opposite sides of understanding. A rookie officer stepping wide-eyed into the real world, and a K-9 labeled uncontrollable after being rejected twice. In a hallway reeking of sweat and explosives, that memory returned with piercing clarity. The moment Sarah was forced to abandon theory forever, taught instead by a lesson written in blood and unwavering loyalty. It was their 4th week at the K-9 camp. She and Max were still struggling to understand each other. During orientation drills, Max often seemed to disobey. He'd veer off, stop mid-task, or suddenly ignore markers entirely. To outsiders, it looked like failure. But to Sarah, who stayed after practice, watching his eyes, something didn't add up. It wasn't defiance. It was a choice with a reason people hadn't yet grasped. Then came the day everything changed. It was a disaster simulation drill, a mock building collapse after an earthquake. Sarah was assigned as commander, directing Max through the debris with verbal cues from the entrance. The warehouse had been reinforced with scaffolds and foam concrete, but the risk of loose structures remained. Max ventured in about 10 meters. Then he froze. He didn't move forward, didn't turn back, just growled low. Sarah called twice more. Max didn't budge. Then, suddenly, he spun around and charged at her, hitting her side with such force that she fell hard, her shoulder crashing into a wooden crate with a sharp snap. Before she could process what had happened, the groan of collapsing wood thundered above her. And in the next breath, a heavy beam, hundreds of pounds, came crashing down right where she had been standing. Dust choked the air. People rushed over. Sarah lay dazed, blood dripping from her forehead and shoulder, and Max, the difficult dog, stood over her, body taut, eyes burning in the chaos. Later, the report confirmed it. An old bolt had slipped in the scaffold, causing a sudden collapse. Max hadn't seen it, but somehow he sensed it. And rather than follow the exercise, he chose to save her. An act that, in the textbook, would have been marked as a failure. That night, Sarah sat beside Max in silence. She said nothing, just rested a hand on his head and let their breaths align. For the first time in her life, she realized some things couldn't be taught by books, drilled through routines, or commanded through orders. Friendship, loyalty, understanding. These had to be built with time, trust, and unconditional belief. From then on, Sarah began learning Max's language. A slight head tilt could mean, "I heard something," a soft stomp. "Someone's ahead," a deep nasal whine, dangerous chemicals, a stuttered bark, threat approaching. They trained not just on the field, but during quiet evenings by the lake, where no commands were given, only silence and listening. And today, when Max led her to the second bomb, without orders, without a leash, just a look back, a glance, Sarah knew they had gone beyond every rule book, past every mold. In a crisis where enemies weren't always visible, only that rare kind of friendship could guide her toward the truth, and more importantly, toward safety for those they vowed to protect. Max wasn't just a working dog. He was Sarah's second heart, and the only soul who had never turned away from her. While the bomb squad worked to clear the site and SWAT units continued to sweep every corner of headquarters, Sarah stood beside Rodriguez and Maya in the security coordination room, where streams of data flowed across the computer monitors like blood coursing through the system's veins. The air in the room was suffocating, not from smoke or lingering explosives, but from the chilling truth uncovered by a seemingly harmless device. An old phone seized from the fake service staff member. Maya, seated next to her, typed quickly, her face so tense that beads of sweat rolled down her temples unnoticed. Sarah quietly watched as Maya cracked through the hidden operating system buried beneath the Android shell. No photos, no calls, not even a contact list, just a series of encrypted apps and a small, deeply hidden file named plainly Update Path 0423. In a split second, rows of GPS coordinates appeared, lines of numerical code. Sarah held her breath. They were her locations, logged in near real time, starting from the moment she left her apartment that morning, the brief stop at a familiar gas station, all the way to when she entered the underground parking garage at headquarters. Red arrows traced the route she and Max had taken, with timestamps down to the second. It was as if an invisible set of eyes had been following them all along. Every routine, every pause, even the moment she adjusted her collar in the reflection of a glass door, it was all recorded with unsettling precision. Rodriguez stepped closer, his eyes narrowed as the trajectory displayed on the map. "Impossible," he muttered. "Officer movements on a ceremonial day are classified Level A. They're not broadcast over public systems. Even I only learned your route less than an hour ago." Sarah clenched her fists, a chill running through her. "Then someone leaked it," she said quietly but firmly. "And not just once. Look." She pointed to a string of decoded messages Maya had just pulled up. Short, cryptic instructions, but unmistakably outlining routes and security plans. Collins leaves home at 0718, ETA at HQ before 0830. West side exit remains primary evacuation route. Device A at 8:45. Device B after 9:10. Prioritize utility corridor. Response team to delay entry post-trigger. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. His eyes flared with a rare fury. This couldn't have come from outside. These details, timing gaps between SWAT units, the ceremonial team's movement path, even your dressing room, this is betrayal. Max let out a low, sharp growl and rose from the corner, tense like he'd been pulled up by the weight of the atmosphere. Sarah glanced at him, then turned to Maya. "Who had access to the route data today?" Maya scanned the code, typed a few trace commands. 8 names appeared: senior officers, team leads, security coordinators, and Lieutenant Charles Wilson, head of internal affairs. Sarah froze. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Wilson was the one who constantly championed transparency, proposed hosting the ceremony in the main hall, invited the press, and insisted on live speeches rather than the usual internal broadcast. But now, his name topped the list for deepest access into the internal system. He had every reason to know, Sarah whispered, and the authority to change anything without needing permission. Rodriguez leaned in, his voice heavy. He was also the one who requested 4 new event staff today, instead of using our regular logistics team, and he was the last person to alter the camera placements in the hall. A cold silence settled over the room, like a funeral shroud, laid atop shattered trust. Max stepped forward, nose pressing against a bag near the desk. The same one Rodriguez had flagged as being found by the restricted entry, a place only high-level personnel were allowed. Max growled again, short, low, but deep. Sarah didn't need a second guess. The scent was still there. Wilson had been here, not long before it all began. She turned to Rodriguez, her voice calm but hard as steel. "We have a mole, and if we don't catch him now, this morning will only be the beginning." Rodriguez nodded, but the look in his eyes had changed. No longer the frustration of a leader betrayed, but the resolve of someone ready to cut out the poison running through his organization. "Then we catch him. But this time," he glanced at Max, then at Sarah, "we let the one thing he can't fool lead the way." Max growled once more, lowering his nose to the ground as if picking up the trail. And Sarah knew. This wasn't just about protecting a ceremony anymore. This was a mission to save the soul of the very police force they had sworn to serve. Just as Max began sniffing around the suspicious bag near the maintenance corridor, where Lieutenant Wilson had likely lurked before the explosion, Sarah and Rodriguez were summoned urgently to the High Command briefing room for a status update. Sarah hesitated, glancing back at Max, reluctant to leave. But Rodriguez gave a reassuring nod. "I'll have someone keep an eye on him. He won't be alone." Sarah knew Max could handle himself. He always had. Still, unease followed her up to the third floor, where decisions were made minute by minute. The meeting room was bright, electronic boards glowing with drone feeds and signal maps from the suspect's phone. Sarah sat opposite Internal Affairs, gripping a file on Wilson. Senior officers took turns presenting updates, but her thoughts were elsewhere, stuck on Max's alert gaze before she left. Focused, watchful, as if he had sensed something was coming. She was about to excuse herself and head back down when a sharp alarm buzzed from Rodriguez's radio. He answered. Maya's voice came through, sharp, urgent. "Max is gone. We just got a blackout signal from the hallway cams. 2 unknown individuals in tech uniforms, unregistered, had entered the corridor with him less than 3 minutes ago. Then the feed was cut." Sarah shot up, stunned. Her heart felt like it had been yanked out of her chest. "No way!" She didn't wait for more. She bolted from the room, leaving chaos behind her. By the time she reached the lower level, the corridor was sealed off. Maya met her there, tablet in hand, walking quickly beside her. "The main feed was disabled, but we recovered a few frames. Here." She held up the screen. Max sat outside the storage room. Calm. 2 men in gray approached, one pretending to drop a toolbox, the other quickly jabbing something into Max's neck. Sarah's breath caught as she watched Max stumble, his hind legs folding, eyes still locked on the camera, still alert, before consciousness faded. "They moved fast," Maya said, voice cracking. "Less than 2 minutes to get him into a van at the rear loading zone. There was a camouflage team waiting. Max's tracker was removed." Sarah stood frozen. Not because she hadn't seen loss before, not because she wasn't used to grief, but because Max wasn't just a K9. He was part of her soul, a partner, the only friend who knew her fears, those she never dared speak aloud, a life that had shielded her from death without hesitation, time and again. "They knew exactly what to do," she said softly. "They didn't hit the armory, didn't touch the server room. They took Max, because they knew without him, I lose my compass." Rodriguez's hand gripped her shoulder, his expression burning with rage. "They made a mistake," he said. "They think taking Max will break you. What they don't know is losing him will make you 10 times more dangerous." An emergency alert echoed through HQ. Full mobilization. Priority? Find Max. Sirens blared. Drones launched from the rooftop. Rapid response teams fanned out across the city, especially the warehouse district previously raided 3 weeks ago. Sarah didn't go back to the meeting room. She changed out of her dress blues into tactical gear, clipped her gun to her belt, checked her comms, and climbed into the command vehicle with Maya. Inside, she held a printed frame, Max's last moment on camera. His amber eyes, unwavering even under sedation. "Wait for me, Max," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. "I'll find you. And this time, it's not just about catching the enemy. This time, it would be a battle to reclaim a piece of her soul she had never let go of, and would never allow anyone to steal." The command vehicle cut swiftly through city streets, now thick with emergency deployments, while Sarah sat pressed against the window, eyes locked on the digital map glowing on Maya's tablet. Max's tracker had been disabled, but Sarah knew one thing for certain. Max never disappeared without leaving a trace. Amid the blare of sirens and the endless buzz of radio chatter, she remained unnervingly silent, gesturing for Maya to rewind the surveillance footage to just before the hallway cameras were cut. Then, at the frame where the small truck exited the rear loading dock behind HQ, Sarah paused it. Her eyes lit up, catching something no one else had noticed. A faint tire track, etched lightly across the concrete, didn't head toward the main exit but looped back toward an old, disused access ramp that led down into the building's abandoned sub-basement. She didn't say a word, just picked up the radio. "I need someone who worked maintenance before the last renovation. Officer Daniels, do you remember the old south basement access?" Daniels' voice came through clearly. "Yes, ma'am. It's sealed, but not fully dismantled. If someone knows the way, they could slip in unnoticed." 30 minutes later, Sarah and Officer Daniels stood before the rusted door leading into the forgotten underground level. A long, damp corridor, abandoned since the electrical systems were last overhauled. No cameras, no patrols, just dim yellow bulbs flickering above crumbling walls and the metallic scent of rust and age. Sarah drew her weapon. Daniels carried a tactical flashlight. They moved without a word, like shadows threading deeper into the bowels of a conspiracy still unfolding. Then they heard it, a soft scrape. Not footsteps, but claws brushing against concrete. Sarah froze. She knew that sound. It was Max, but not his usual steady gait. This was slow, dragging as if he was struggling to move, trying to signal that he was still alive. She motioned for Daniels to kill the light, pressing close to the mildew-covered wall on the left. There, barely visible, a narrow gap led to an old maintenance room, sealed only with rusted chain and a corroded bolt. Sarah didn't hesitate. She raised a metal pipe and broke the lock in 2 hard strikes. The door creaks open, revealing a small, pitch-black chamber. There, on the damp tile floor, surrounded by frayed wires and moldy mattresses, lay Max. His body trembled from the lingering sedatives, but the moment he saw her, his eyes lit up. He couldn't stand yet, but he pushed himself forward, letting out a soft growl, a greeting, a cry, a name spoken in the only language they'd ever needed, the language of bonded souls. Sarah dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of touching a piece of her heart she thought she'd lost. She whispered, "I'm here, old friend. I'm here, and I'm not letting anyone lay a hand on you again." Max nuzzled into her palm. Weak, but still trying to lift his head, trying to show her. He was here. Whole, and still the warrior she had trusted her life to. Daniel swept the room quickly. Fresh boot prints. They left not long ago. His flashlight scanned the walls, catching on a cluster of pinned maps. Floor plans of HQ, parking zones, utility corridors. And most alarming of all, the evidence storage area from the cartel bust 3 weeks ago. Sarah's heart pounded. She understood instantly. Max wasn't taken just to break her. He was hidden here, inside HQ itself, as part of a bigger plan, smarter, bolder, and deadlier than anything they'd faced before. Max whimpered, then tried to rise. Sarah steadied him and whispered a vow. "It's okay now, but we have to move. They're not finished." And in Max's amber eyes, still foggy from the drugs, she saw clarity, instinct, and the will to fight again. For her, for justice, for those who still believed in the truth. In the depths of that forgotten basement, surrounded by cracked concrete and shadows, 2 partners were reunited. And the enemy would soon regret not killing the strongest soul in the Atlanta PD. Max still trembled slightly as he stood, but his eyes were sharp again, alert, intense, just like before every mission. With one arm around him, Sarah guided Max and Officer Daniels out of the maintenance room, her mind racing through every clue they'd just uncovered. The marked maps, the hidden blueprints, the sealed passageways. They all pointed to a terrifying possibility. This basement wasn't just where Max had been held. It was the launch point for an attack. One aimed straight at the department's heart, the cartel evidence vault. Sarah radioed the command center immediately, her voice steady but pulsing with urgency. Technical Sub-Level B is being used as an infiltration route. Signs of tunnel activity. Likely targeting Vault 4. Dispatch special response. Maya, run a full integrity check on all secured sectors. But the voice that came back wasn't Maya's usual crisp tone. It was faint, broken by static, buried under an emergency alarm. Sarah, they planted something at the auxiliary junction. I'm trying to disarm it, but... A loud crash rang out, then silence, before another officer cut in. Technician Torres is down. She's bleeding badly. We need someone to take over the device. Sarah's heart seized. Max growled low, recognizing Maya's voice, familiar and distressed. No time to hesitate. She handed Max to Daniels, speaking fast. Keep him here. Check for any lingering toxins in his system. And if anything moves, don't wait. Shoot! She didn't need directions. Every inch of the basement was etched in her memory from years of silent observation and survival instinct. When she arrived, the scene before her stole the air from her chest. Maya was slumped against the wall, blood soaking her left sleeve, her face pale as chalk, but her arm still pointed toward the explosive device nestled inside a steel casing, placed right next to a high-pressure gas main. "You have to take over," she whispered, her voice thin and trembling. "No one else knows this circuit. It's a new version of the one we saw in the cartel warehouse, but now with a thermal pressure sensor." Sarah clenched her fists, dropping to her knees beside Maya. Her eyes scanned the circuitry. Unfamiliar at first glance, yet something about its core structure struck her like déjà vu. Someone had upgraded the old model, made it resistant to standard disarmament tools. They knew what they were doing. She lifted her head, her eyes hard as steel. "I've got this." Maya gave a faint nod, then slipped unconscious into the arms of the arriving medics. Sarah pulled a pair of anti-static gloves from her back pocket. With her other hand, she reached for her portable circuit disarm kit. Every motion she made now was a dance on the razor's edge between survival and catastrophe. One wrong move, and the entire pipeline would blow, triggering a chain reaction that could take out half the headquarters. Sweat streamed down her temple, falling onto the dust-covered floor. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze never wavered. She locked in. As she worked to peel away the protective layers, a low rumble began echoing in the distance, deep, rhythmic, like a seismic pulse. Drills, metal hitting concrete. There was no doubt now. The cartel was tunneling beneath the building, aiming to strike straight at the heart of the city's justice system. Sarah shut out every sound but the one in front of her, the subtle click of tools, the hum of the circuitry. She rotated the small connector a quarter turn, felt the resistance give, and touched the terminal point. A dry, definitive click echoed from the panel. The screen turned blue. The device was disabled. She exhaled slowly. Relief, fleeting but real. But before she could rise, a small explosion thudded from farther down the hallway. Not a full blast, just a dirt-breaking mine. Enough to confirm it. They had breached the tunnel wall. The attack had begun. Sarah grabbed her radio, voice sharp as a blade. "They're coming in. Activate emergency response in sub-level C. All tactical teams move to support." She paused, just for a breath. "And Rodriguez, tell Officer Daniels to ready Max. I need him." As Sarah drew her sidearm and moved toward the sound, growing louder with each step, she knew this was no longer about defense. This was a counterattack. And with Max preparing to return to the field, no one on the other side of that thick, cold wall could imagine what was coming for them. Because now, in the depths of this shadowed basement, she and Max were ready to reclaim what was worth protecting with everything they had, even if it meant laying down their lives. Footsteps thundered through the narrow basement corridors like war drums pounding toward the front lines. Just as Sarah disarmed the last gas bomb planted at the pipe junction, she felt it. The shift. This was no longer a cautious infiltration cloaked in shadows. It was a full-on, coordinated assault, precise, deliberate, and calculated. The drilling noises had stopped. Instead came the cold clinks of metal on steel, the creak of hinges swinging open, the faint Spanish commands bleeding through interference-ridden radio chatter. One thing was clear. They were in position, and the target was moments from exposure. Max and Officer Daniels had already flanked from the eastern corridor, the one leading directly to what was quietly known as the heart of the building's evidence system, Digital Vault Room 4. It was the most secure storage site in the precinct, not just housing high-profile evidence, but something even more dangerous. Something only a few within the department even knew existed. A black SSD drive containing the cartel's shadow ledger, including encrypted records of government officials and law enforcement agents complicit in laundering operations. What the cartel hadn't foreseen was that the raid 3 weeks ago, led by Sarah and Max, would cost them more than drugs. It had exposed their darkest secret to the most incorruptible hands. Sarah would never forget the moment Maya handed her the unmarked SSD. No label, no logo, just a single password, CF Los Nombres. The data, pulled from a server hidden inside a cartel warehouse wall, had only been discovered thanks to Max, who had sensed a faint vibration beneath the cement floor. After days of decoding, they uncovered a list of nearly 300 names. Businessmen, politicians, even senior officers. Every one of them bought or complicit. Due to its volatility, the drive had not been transferred to federal authorities. Instead, it was secured in the sub-basement vault. Until now. Now, that very vault was the target of a breach from below. Sarah tapped her radio, eyes locked on the thick steel door ahead. All units, reroute to sub-level C7. Digital Vault Room 4 is the objective. This is not just about protecting evidence. It's about protecting the future of this department. Rodriguez's voice cut through the static, razor sharp. Confirmed. Teams 3 and 4 are converging from the north entrance. SWAT en route from rooftop descent. Maya is stable but monitoring data remotely. Sarah, you're the closest to the vault. She didn't wait to hear more. She sprinted down the hall, Max and Daniels close behind. The approach to Vault 4 was a maze. Dual code entry, biometric fingerprint scan, and a vintage mechanical lock. But what chilled Sarah wasn't the complexity of the system. It was the fact that they knew how it worked. Data leaked from the fake staffer's phone had contained structural schematics. If the cartel had someone on the inside, or a password, this door might as well be paper. Suddenly, Max stopped dead in his tracks near the vault corridor. His ears twitched. His body tensed. Then he let out a low growl and turned toward a narrow maintenance hatch. Partially open, leading down to a crawl space beneath the vault. Sarah understood instantly. They were planting charges from below. If she didn't stop them in time, they'd bring the entire evidence room down from underneath. She ordered Daniels to lock down the upper exits, then squeezed into the freezing crawl space with Max. The duct reeked of cold metal and damp air. Ahead, 2 silhouettes crouched over a small cylindrical device, less than 3 meters below the vault. One wore a fake engineer's uniform. The other stood armed, guarding the hallway. Sarah tightened her grip on her sidearm and signaled Max. He crouched low, a blur in the half-light, then surged forward with terrifying precision. A scream rang out as Max sank his jaws into the gunman's wrist. At the same time, Sarah rolled out from cover, fired 2 warning shots that sent the second intruder stumbling back. But it was too late. The timer had started. She had less than a minute to disable the device. Dropping to her knees, Sarah focused her mind, recalling the detonation model they had encountered before. Her hands moved quickly but precisely, gliding over the tangle of wires that had become all too familiar. Behind her, Max kept the 2 suspects pinned to the ground, his low, steady growl a wordless reminder that every second counted, and that any mistake could cost them all. Then, with a single, exact cut, there was a soft click. The vibration stopped. The warning light on the device shifted from red to white. Sarah looked up, breath shallow, sweat dripping down her face as if she'd just emerged from a storm. Her heart pounded relentlessly, still struggling to believe they'd made it in time. She turned to Max. He was still standing, his fur streaked with dust, but his eyes were alive and blazing with intensity. They didn't exchange a word. They didn't need to. The cartel had come within inches of destroying everything, but only within inches. Because this time, she and Max had gotten there first. And with the encrypted data still locked behind that steel door, they hadn't just protected an investigation. They had protected the one thing that mattered more, a flickering hope that justice hadn't yet been completely sold out. The piercing sound of the security alarm blared just as Sarah successfully disabled the explosive planted beneath the records room. She barely had a second to breathe when a panicked voice crackled through the radio from the command center. A group of suspects is escaping through the rear service exit. They've got a copy of the data. Gray truck, no plates, leaving the basement level. Repeat, the data has been copied heading eastbound. Sarah shot to her feet, blood pounding in her temples. Max growled ferociously, as if instantly understanding that this wasn't just a getaway. It was the cartel's last-ditch attempt to erase every trace of the evidence they'd fought so hard to protect. Less than 5 minutes later, Sarah, Rodriguez, and Max tore out of the back parking lot in a black tactical SUV, red lights flashing, sirens screaming as they cut through the tense downtown air of Atlanta. Maya, though still under treatment, managed to transmit coordinates from the surveillance drone. The unmarked truck had turned onto the interstate and veered into the abandoned industrial zone along the river, once a bustling port now reduced to rusted warehouses and crumbling concrete. "They're heading to the docks," Rodriguez muttered, jaw clenched, hands gripping the wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. "If they get off land, it's over." Sarah said nothing. She reached out and placed her hand on Max, who stood alert between the front seats, ears rigid, eyes locked on the road ahead, already zeroed in on the enemy. The afternoon streets were packed, sunlight glaring off glass and pavement, but their SUV moved like a black arrow, slicing through traffic as cars scattered to either side. The drone fed live footage from above, the gray truck weaving through alleyways, using abandoned containers to block pursuit. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Guide us over the left bridge. Cut them off by the old rail line." What followed was a storm of action. The truck burst through a rusted tin fence, sending dust and debris into the air as it barreled past a crumbling warehouse. Rodriguez swerved hard, their SUV smashing through stacked wooden crates and staying hot on the target's tail as it sped recklessly toward the docks. Inside the vehicle, Max let out quiet, sharp growls, claws scraping the floor as if counting every inch of ground, his body coiled like a drawn bowstring. As they reached the derelict port, where rusted train cars lay strewn among weeds and shattered cement, Sarah knew they were here to either load the data onto a waiting boat or destroy it mid-river. She leapt from the SUV, and Max bolted ahead, leading the charge through the chaotic maze of shipping containers. Gunshots cracked in the distance. Rodriguez returned fire as one of the cartel gunmen appeared atop a crate. But Max was already flanking from behind, vaulting up a concrete mound and pouncing with lethal precision, knocking the rifle loose and sending the man sprawling in pain. Sarah pressed forward, eyes scanning every shadowed corner, until she spotted the last 2 cartel members at the edge of the dock, dragging a black case toward a waiting motorboat. No hesitation. She dropped to one knee, raised her weapon, and held her breath for a single heartbeat before squeezing the trigger. The bullet struck the one holding the case. He collapsed to the rotting wood deck while the other froze, throwing up his hands in surrender as Max lunged, snarling. Rodriguez closed in moments later, cuffing the 2 survivors while Sarah grabbed the black case, heavy, still sealed. She opened the lock, heart pounding. Inside, the familiar encrypted SSD, the stolen money laundering data was intact. Sarah exhaled in relief, turning to see Max standing at the riverbank, chest heaving, fur streaked with dust and enemy blood, but his eyes unwavering and sharp. Rodriguez stepped beside her, pride and solemnity in his voice. "We kept it safe, but if they're willing to risk this much, the one pulling the strings hasn't shown their face yet." Sarah nodded. There was no peace in her heart. She knew this was only the first chase. The real war was still hidden somewhere in the shadows of this city, where darkness seeped into offices, outposts, and maybe even into the ranks of those she trusted. And Max, the only one who had never betrayed that trust, remained at her side. Silent, unsung, asking for no medals, just the chance to keep fighting, right beside her. The late afternoon sun slanted through the glass windows of the third-floor security office as Sarah placed the suitcase containing the data copy onto the table, her nerves still frayed from the harrowing chase at the train yard. Rodriguez was coordinating with the federal investigation team to decode the storage device, while Max, mud-splattered and dust-covered, sat closely by her side, as if sensing there was still something weighing on her mind, something unspoken. And there was. Deep inside, one detail kept gnawing at her, a small, sharp memory she hadn't voiced since leaving the scene. Max's eyes in the surveillance footage from the medal ceremony. That moment when he let out a low growl as someone passed by, an odd flicker no one had paid attention to. Sarah exhaled slowly and keyed in the command to replay the footage from that morning, the main lobby camera just before the ceremony began. On screen, Max sat calmly beside her, alert but still, until a man in an internal affairs uniform walked past. Lieutenant Charles Wilson, head of internal affairs. He had attended every meeting as a senior advisor, was the one who had suggested the ceremony's schedule change, and, crucially, was the first to gain access to the classified files from the cartel bust 3 weeks prior. She paused the footage, rewound to the frame where Wilson passed by Max. And there it was, clearer than ever. Max tilting his head, hackles raised, eyes locked on Wilson until he disappeared from view. It was a reflex Sarah had seen hundreds of times on real operations, a signature response Max only displayed when he detected explosives, chemical traces, or danger in human form. But back then, amid the formal air and high-ranking guests, she had dismissed it as anxiety from the crowd. Now, in the still room filled only with the hum of the fan and her keystrokes, Sarah stopped the video at the frame, showing Max watching Wilson. She zoomed in. Max's gaze wasn't just observant, it was deeply wary, the kind of look he reserved only for those who had lied before. And Sarah knew. Max had never been wrong. Not once. She stood, eyes shifting to the window where the sunset was casting gold across the city. The same city they were fighting to keep honest in a war where the lines between good and evil had all but blurred. "Wilson," she said the name aloud, like a quiet verdict. Max tried to warn me, and I ignored him. Max let out a soft growl as if agreeing. Sarah knelt beside him, stroking his back, whispering with quiet regret but firm resolve. "Not this time. I won't look away again." She returned to the system's access logs, pulling up the internal records from the morning of the ceremony. Among familiar IDs, Wilson's appeared 3 times, each just minutes apart, with no clear reason. Most telling was 8:46, the exact moment the first planted device was slipped into the coffee thermos. His system had also been the last to approve the logistics team roster, where 2 fake technicians were later arrested. Sarah's heart skipped. She didn't need more proof. The question was no longer who, but what is he hiding, and how far has he gone? Wilson didn't just know about the data. He knew the system's structure, patrol schedules, and even the connections between agents chasing the cartel trail. And if any part of that intel was still in his hands, then everything they had fought for was still under threat. She looked back at Max, fire igniting in her eyes. "We've got work to do, old friend," she said quietly, reaching for the pistol beside the data case. "The enemy left footprints in our own house. This time we follow them, wherever they lead." Max straightened, tail flicking once. In that instant, they were back on the front lines. Not for glory, not for medals, but for truth, and a loyalty that had never wavered. Wasting not a second after her suspicion crystallized, sharpened like Max's gaze that morning, Sarah sought out Captain Rodriguez. In the soundproof war room on the second floor, bathed in warm amber light and cluttered with connection charts and thick case files, she laid everything out. Max's reaction on the footage, the buried access logs masked by internal affairs, and the troubling timing of Wilson's movements about key incidents. Rodriguez sat still for a long breath, hands interlocked on the table, as if holding down his anger. Finally, he nodded, voice rough but steady. "We need him to reveal himself, but we must let him think he's still in control." Sarah didn't need more. She knew exactly what Rodriguez meant. A trap, not for a petty criminal, but to unmask a serpent who had coiled deep within their system, nearly swallowing their trust whole. By nightfall, the plan was in motion. Sarah leaked false intel through the internal network, claiming a second copy of the cartel data had been found in an unmarked box in the archives. She deliberately let it slip that the evidence would be transferred to the temporary storage vault the next morning. A risky move if true, but enough to rattle the mole. At dawn, in the dim light of the ground floor lobby, Sarah waited silently behind one-way glass, watching the evidence room across the corridor. Max lay taut at her feet, muscles coiled like a drawn wire. Rodriguez positioned himself in a side hallway, where a concealed camera was ready to record every second. 8:43. The evidence room door opened quietly, just as scripted. Lieutenant Charles Wilson stepped in, coat concealing the hand holding a high-clearance keycard. He scanned the room, then moved directly to shelf 11, where Rodriguez had planted a unique pistol, long missing from an unsolved cartel-related homicide last year. Sarah held her breath as Wilson opened the shelf, his fingers brushing the gun before tucking it into his coat, with a reflex too smooth to be innocent. And right then, Rodriguez stepped in. "Early today, Charles?" he said, voice casual, but his eyes locked onto the incriminating movement. Wilson froze for a beat, then forced a smile. "Heard there was a hiccup with the transfer. Just came to check if I could help." But Sarah had already entered, with Max at her side. Her gaze no longer held suspicion, only the cold clarity of certainty. "Are you here to secure the evidence or erase it?" Before Wilson could answer, Max growled, a low, deep sound Sarah knew well. A sound Max only made when danger was real. Then, as if sensing the walls closing in, Wilson reached for another gun hidden at his waist, spinning to aim at Rodriguez. But Max was faster. In a blur of motion, he lunged, his body hitting the ground only to launch again, straight at the traitor. The gunshot rang out, but it was too late. Max had taken him down before his finger could pull the trigger. Sarah rushed in, pinned Wilson down, and cuffed him tightly while Rodriguez recovered the pistol, the same one that matched 3 shell casings from the assassination of a major cartel witness last year. Wilson didn't struggle. He just gasped, staring up at Sarah. Not with arrogance, but the hollow terror of a man unmasked. "You don't understand," he whispered, but Sarah shook her head. She didn't need to. "I don't need to understand," she said, voice calm as a verdict. "I just need to trust Max. And he's never been wrong." Rodriguez signaled the holding unit, nodding slightly at Sarah as the internal affairs team stepped in. The hunt was over, and the most elusive traitor had been brought down by the very thing he underestimated most, the instincts of a loyal dog. Max sat beside Sarah, his breathing steadying after the life-risking lunge. No words were spoken. They didn't need any. Trust had just been reclaimed, with courage and a loyalty that had never once faltered. The news of Lieutenant Charles Wilson's arrest, once a symbol of moral integrity within the Atlanta Police Department, spread faster than any media storm. No press release, no public statement, Just glances that shifted in the hallway, handshakes left hanging, and a heavy silence whenever his name was mentioned. Wilson wasn't just a high-ranking officer. He was the one rookies were told to model themselves after. Follow his standards, and you'll do just fine. So, when the truth broke, the damage wasn't just about betrayal. It hit deeper. It was the collapse of trust from within. Sarah stood before the department's wall of honor in the main lobby, where a photo still showed Wilson shaking hands with the former police chief during a swearing-in ceremony 3 years ago. Below it, in bold letters, "Integrity is the foundation of justice." Now that phrase felt like a knife twisting silently. Beside her, Max lay still, his head resting on Sarah's foot, eyes quietly tracking each officer who passed. Every subtle nod, every step that seemed less certain than the day before. Max didn't need to understand betrayal in words. He could smell the change in the air, the scent of loss, of fractured loyalty, and a kind of sadness that had no voice. At the end of the hallway, Officer Daniels stood alone, hands in his jacket pockets, staring out at the training yard. His hair is still damp with sweat. Proof he had arrived early, perhaps to avoid the whispers or questions he didn't yet know how to face. Sarah walked over without a word. Max followed with slow, steady steps. The air between them was awkward at first, like two people who'd once disagreed, but no longer had a reason to argue. "Still in shock?" Sarah asked, her voice soft, like wind brushing past. Daniels was silent for a while, then nodded. "Not because Wilson got arrested, but because I believed he couldn't be wrong. Everything he did seemed so correct, polished, by the book." He paused, glancing at Max, who sat beside them now. "But Max, from the first day I met him, I knew he was different, not like the other K-9s trained to obey. He felt like he chose everything himself." Sarah gave a quiet smile. "Max doesn't follow. He collaborates." And then she told him, slowly, with emotion, about their early years together. How Max refused to complete drills if they didn't feel right. How he once saved her from a collapsing training facility, even though protocol said to stay put and wait for help. "He doesn't need orders to do the right thing," Sarah said. "And in a world where everyone tries to follow the rules, that might be the most dangerous thing of all." Daniels looked at Max, who now gazed toward the lawn, where a few officers were taking down Wilson's nameplate from the wall of honor. He exhaled deeply, then knelt, reaching out to stroke Max's head, something Sarah had never seen from the usually reserved young officer. "I used to think he was just a tool, a really good dog," Daniels whispered. "But now I know Max isn't this department's dog. He's its soul, the only one who spoke up, when everyone else stayed silent." Sarah nodded, unable to hide her pride. "And he's changed how a young officer sees the world." Daniels turned to her. The look in his eyes no longer belonged to a rookie. It was the gaze of someone who had just stepped into the true depths of justice. "I think it's time I start learning from scratch. Not from the books, from Max, from both of you." Sarah said nothing, but her look carried empathy and hope. Among the wounds left behind by betrayal, a seed of transformation had begun to grow. Quietly, stubbornly, because sometimes it's the cracks that let the light in. And there, on the wall that once honored a fraud, now stood something else entirely. The quiet beginning of a new generation learning to place their trust, not in rank or titles, but in instinct, courage, and the heart to believe in what isn't always said aloud. Max rose gently, as if sensing it was time to go. But with every step he took, the fractures in the department seemed to knit together, stitched by the steady, silent presence of a hero who didn't need to speak because his eyes already taught them all what loyalty truly looked like. Just as the station had begun to catch its breath after the Wilson scandal, as officers like Daniels were slowly rebuilding trust with quiet, genuine actions, the sky over Atlanta shifted again, not to the soft gold of hope, but to the stormy gray of a threat still lurking in the shadows. Max suddenly perked his ears, hackles raised, releasing a low growl Sarah recognized instantly, his signal for extreme danger. Seconds later, The internal alert system blared out 3 sharp tones, the emergency code not heard since the terror attack last year. Rodriguez's radio came alive with the frantic voice of the duty officer. Headquarters is under assault from 3 directions. Not cartel, not directly. Mercenaries, heavily armed. They've breached the southern access and are advancing through the sublevels. We have signs of signal jammers and armor-piercing weapons. Sarah didn't wait. She grabbed her comm unit and motioned to Max, issuing orders as she moved. All units, evacuate administrative floors. Lock down the top 2 levels. SWAT to hold the 3rd floor. Bomb squad to sweep the ventilation routes. Digital evidence and intel servers are top priority. Hold every layer. Do not let them take anything. Rodriguez appeared at the corridor junction, body armor hastily thrown on, his usual calm gone, replaced by the fire of resolve. "This isn't a sneak attack," he said flatly. "They're here to burn the place down." Sarah nodded, eyes scanning her tablet's incoming drone feed. 3 tactical squads, 6 per team, armed with auto rifles, military-grade Kevlar, and breaching shields. They weren't thugs. These were trained professionals. No longer cartel pawns. These were soldiers. This wasn't defense anymore. This was war, fighting for every wall, every corridor to protect the heart of the force. Just before the steel doors to the data center sealed shut, Max pressed against Sarah's leg, looking up at her as if to ask, "Are you ready?" She placed her hand gently on his head and whispered, "It's always you before the storm." The first gunshots cracked in the west hallway. A mercenary squad had breached the lower level using low-noise explosives and was forming up outside the secure zone. Sarah and Max led the rapid response team through the smoke-choked corridor, veering into the conference wing where the enemy had shattered glass doors. Without waiting for a command, Max launched forward, his body slicing through the air, slamming into the shield bearer before the man could raise his weapon. Sarah dropped the second one with a clean shot to the chest. Her backup officers swept in and cleared the rest. 15 seconds. The line held, but only for a moment. The second group arrived at the evidence wing's emergency exit, carrying flamethrowers and electromagnetic breachers. They weren't just here to steal data. They came to burn it all down. Sarah didn't hesitate. She sprinted into Archive Room 2, where someone had already begun remotely accessing the servers. "Maya, are they inside the system?" she shouted through her comm. Maya's voice crackled from the control hub. "They're breaking the 3rd firewall! If they crack it, every file on the main network will be gone!" Max stood at the door, snarling, then suddenly bolted right. A mercenary had slipped in through the rear using magnetic charges. Max struck like lightning, slamming the intruder into the steel wall hard enough to knock him out before he could even aim. Sarah rushed to the server rack, yanked out the master drive, stuffed it into her armor vest, and planted a self-destruct device in the backup slot, just in case. As she pulled back, a thunderous blast rocked the ground floor. Team 3 had detonated the wall barricades, clearing the way for an armored mini-tank. The entire headquarters turned into a war zone. Flashing lights, smoke, gunfire, chaos in every direction. But through it all, Sarah stood tall, not just because of training or instinct, but because Max was beside her, the one being in the world she'd trust with her life, without hesitation. Rodriguez's voice cracked over the radio. "Reinforcements ETA, 3 minutes. Hold the data room, at all costs." Sarah's answer was simple, firm, and final, her finger tightening on the trigger. "We'll hold. This is our home, and Max doesn't let anyone pass without a price." Blood, smoke, steel, and loyalty. Justice had never been fought for so fiercely, and the nightmare had only just begun. The alarm still hadn't faded when Sarah and Max veered off the main hallway and descended toward the underground parking garage, where a small team of mercenaries, flagged by the surveillance drone, had been identified as the bomb squad. These were the most dangerous of them all. They weren't there to take the building, but to destroy it from below. Time was short. The rapid response team was pinned down in other firefights, and only Sarah and Max were close enough to the auxiliary maintenance route to intercept them in time. Max led the way, moving like a shadow through the tangle of stairwells, ears twitching with every shift in sound, paws silent against the concrete, every step placed with precision and purpose. Sarah stayed close behind, eyes razor-focused, her Glock gripped tight, safety off since leaving the data wing. Her mind raced, adrenaline, worry for her team spread across multiple battlefronts, and a strange, creeping sense, the gut feeling of confronting a ghost she thought had long been buried. At the edge of the garage ceiling, a maze of rusted ducts and steel beams, Sarah crouched and peered through a narrow opening between two girders. Below, a tall figure was hunched over a device, adjusting a bomb planted between two of the building's main support columns. The dim yellow light glinted off black hair, tanned skin, and a scar that ran from the right jawline into the collar. She didn't need more than a second to know. Victor Ramirez, a former K-9 operative, once Max's handler before Sarah, once a legend, until arrogance and unresolved anger had cost him everything. Dismissed for misconduct, exiled, forgotten. But not by Max. Beside her, Max went rigid, his breath slow and deep as if restraining something primal. His amber eyes locked onto the man below. Not with curiosity, but memory. The memory of trust betrayed. Sarah tightened her grip on the pistol and signaled. They'd split. She would circle left through a maintenance shaft. Max would drop in from a broken air duct above. Once in position, she counted silently. Then, attack! Max struck first, silent as midnight, fierce as a blade. He landed squarely on Ramirez's shoulder, knocking him off balance. Sarah burst in right behind, weapon raised. Hands where I can see them, Victor. There's no way out of this. Ramirez looked up, eyes burning, not with rage, but something deeper. Pain twisted into hate. You don't understand, he snarled. I gave Max everything. I trained him. I made him. And you stole him from me. He shoved Max aside and lunged at Sarah, kicking to force her back. The fight exploded, not just between two bodies, but two ideologies. Ramirez, the fallen soldier, every strike fueled by bitterness. Sarah, swift and balanced, fighting not alone but with Max. Two beings acting as one. Max blocked each draw of Ramirez's blade with quick, calculated lunges, his jaws clamping the man's arm before the weapon could strike. Sarah didn't fire. She didn't come to kill. She came for the truth. Ramirez roared in pain as blood streamed down his forearm, Max's teeth holding him in place. But he didn't stop. They promised me everything, my honor, my rank, everything I lost. All I had to do was take Max back, and burn down the lies that made him turn against me. Sarah stepped closer, no longer angry, only quietly heartbroken. You never lost Max, Victor, she said softly. You lost yourself. He just chose not to follow someone sinking in their hate. Max still held his arm but didn't bite harder. His eyes held no fury, only a solemn, quiet sadness, like an old friend saying goodbye to a path long abandoned. Ramirez finally collapsed. Sarah handcuffed him, then carefully disarmed the bomb's trigger. She looked to Max, then back to the man slumped on the cold concrete. If you ever taught Max anything, it was how to fight for what's right. But what's right is never built on hate. Silence settled over the garage, just the heavy breathing of three souls once tied by the same road, now separated by the paths they chose. But the bomb hadn't gone off. The station still stood, and Max was still Max. Loyal, not by command, but by heart. The cuffs had barely clicked shut around Ramirez's wrists when it happened. Sarah turned to inspect the bomb one last time. In that split second, Ramirez moved, like a cornered animal lashing out. He dropped his head, twisted his arms to shift the cuffs, and pulled a tiny concealed pistol from the lining of his boot. It happened too fast, but the gunshot felt like it echoed in slow motion, slicing through the stillness of the underground like a blade. Max saw it first. Before Sarah could react, he hurled himself forward, intercepting the bullet with his body, shielding her completely. The shot rang out. Max jerked mid-air, a muffled whimper escaping his throat before he hit the concrete floor with a dull, sickening thud. Not just a fall, but the sound of something sacred being torn. Sarah froze for a second that stretched like an eternity, split between instinct and heartbreak. Her reflex pulled the trigger. A single shot from her Glock tore into Ramirez's shoulder, knocking him down beside the inactive bomb. Then the world went silent. No more alarms, no more rushing footsteps, just Max's broken breathing and Sarah's heart shattering beat by beat. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she stroked his back. Warm blood seeped through his dark fur, spreading across the cold concrete like ink. "No, not like this, Max," she whispered over and over, voice cracking, her eyes dry but screaming from within. Max tried to lift his head. His amber eyes, always so certain, were dim now, fading, but still fixed on hers, unwavering. Rodriguez and Daniels arrived just then, followed by emergency medics. "We need a stretcher, now! Left flank, possible lung puncture!" Rodriguez barked. But Sarah wouldn't move. Her hand pressed against Max's chest, willing every faltering beat to stay. Max took a labored breath. His nose nuzzled Sarah's wrist, a final gesture from a soldier who never asked why, only fought to ensure his partner lived. When Max was lifted onto the stretcher, Sarah walked beside him, never leaving his side. In the specialized K9 ambulance, she sat close, gripping his paw as if to tether him to life. Each minute felt like an hour. She didn't dare imagine the worst, but she couldn't let herself hope too much either. She just held on. The last touch before Max's eyes fluttered shut, as if saying, "I'm still here, don't give up." Rodriguez was on the phone non-stop, calling every top veterinary surgeon he could reach. Meanwhile, Daniel sat silently outside the emergency room, head bowed, both hands gripping his K9 badge like a quiet act of prayer. The entire team had gathered, but no one spoke. They didn't have to, because everyone understood. Max wasn't just Sarah's partner or a fellow soldier or even a remarkable dog. Max was her heart. He was the soul of the unit. He was the living proof that trust still had a place in a world that seemed to be slipping further into chaos. Now, they waited. Not for the end of a surgery, but for the answer to a question too heavy to say out loud. Had someone like Ramirez truly managed to steal the last light Sarah had left? And in the dark stillness of the ambulance, as it raced through city streets still glowing with fire and smoke from a war that refused to end, Sarah held Max's paw again and whispered, barely audible, "You've saved me more times than I can count. This time let me be the one waiting for you. Come back to me, old friend, please." The next morning, as soft sunlight streamed through the tall glass panels of the Atlanta Police Department's main hall, a space still carrying the smoke stains and scattered debris from the previous day's siege, a solemn stillness filled the air. It wasn't the kind of silence meant for formalities. It was the hush born from hearts being stitched back together by courage, blood, and the unconditional bond between a woman and her loyal dog. Sarah stood at the corner of the hall, dressed in her cleaned police uniform, though faint scorch marks from yesterday's fight still clung to the fabric. She wore no adornments, except a small silver clasp on her left shoulder, reserved for the Medal of Valor, now left bare, because to her, the greatest honor wasn't a medal. It was the warm breath brushing gently against her leg, from the familiar muzzle that had returned after a night spent fighting off death itself. Max, his left flank still wrapped in gauze, walking with a slight limp, had been declared out of danger by the medical team. Though advised to rest, he had risen on sheer will to make it to the ceremony on time. Not for recognition, but for Sarah, and for the quiet promise between two souls weathered by countless storms, to always be there for each other, no matter what. The hall fell silent as Commissioner Hayes stepped onto a makeshift wooden podium assembled overnight, holding two small boxes lined with navy velvet. There were no cameras, No high-ranking officials, just officers in uniform, carrying fresh wounds and eyes changed forever by a night without sleep. Eyes that had seen light survive in the darkest of hours. "Yesterday," Hayes began, his voice steady but clear in the still room. "We didn't just lose walls, windows, or data. We nearly lost a part of this department's soul." He paused, his gaze landing on Max, who sat quietly beside Sarah, tail twitching, amber eyes still tired but shining. "What moved me most wasn't that we survived, but how we did, thanks to an officer who never gave up on trust, and a partner who never stepped back." All eyes followed as Sarah stepped forward, guiding Max at her side. Her footsteps echoed across the floor while the soft click of Max's claws followed like a second heartbeat. Hayes opened the first box and pinned the Platinum Star of Valor to Sarah's chest, awarded for protecting the department and preventing a tragedy that could have claimed dozens of lives. Then, opening the second box, he knelt reverently and fastened to Max's collar the highest K-9 honor ever awarded in the city of Atlanta, a symbol not just of bravery, but of a loyalty that defied reason and words. Standing before the team, Sarah closed her hand into a fist. Her eyes glistened but held no tears. Her voice was low and unwavering, like stone. "I'm not here because I'm better than anyone. I'm standing here because I never once doubted my partner. Max saved me. He saved all of us. And I believe if you've ever looked into his eyes the way I have, you'd understand. Justice doesn't always walk on two legs. Sometimes it runs on four and growls when truth is threatened." The applause that followed wasn't loud or rushed. It was deep, steady, and full of meaning. From the front row to the very back, officers who had once doubted Max, who had struggled to believe in what couldn't be measured by reports or metrics, now stood, not just to clap, but to bow their heads to a dog who had taught them what honor meant, what loyalty couldn't be forced, and what true partnership looked like without needing words. Max tilted his head, glancing first at Sarah, then at the room. He didn't bark. He didn't perform. His presence, bandages still fresh but eyes lit with purpose, was the clearest statement of all. "I'm back, and I'm not done yet." And in that simple ceremony, without flags or fanfare, one truth became clear to everyone in the room. This was what true honor looked like. Not in medals, but in hearts that could not be bought, and spirits that would not be broken. As the hall slowly emptied and the final claps faded, late sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting golden streaks across the polished tile floor. Sarah didn't leave with the others. Instead, she returned to the security archives, a room that, just 2 days ago, had been the front line of a life-or-death battle. Now it was eerily quiet. On the table sat the black hard drive, the one the tech team had recovered and rebuilt after the attack. And the moment Sarah plugged it into the internal network, the sense of safety that had just begun to return vanished instantly. The screen flickered to life, revealing a new set of files, deeply encrypted, unlike anything they had previously cracked. Buried beneath the cartel data was another network, more complex, broader, still active. A virtual map appeared, tracking money flows across multiple countries, 12 major cities, 7 shell organizations, and dozens of code names linked to billionaires, politicians, and global private security firms. The center of the map? Not Atlanta. Somewhere far beyond. Beyond borders. Beyond the laws she once believed could contain it. Max padded into the room, his steps soft, but his eyes alert, brighter than they had been all day. He sensed it, too. Something was wrong. Sarah sat down beside him, turned the screen toward him, and ran a hand down his back in a familiar grounding ritual. "See that?" she whispered, eyes fixed on the glowing web of encrypted routes and code names. "We haven't touched the core. The cartel was just the surface. What's behind it is bigger, and far more dangerous." Max didn't bark, but he leaned forward, ears up, muscles tight, fully present. Sarah recognized that look. It was the look he wore in the first hours of any mission. When the path ahead was unclear, his heart was already ready to follow it. She leaned back in her chair, exhaled slowly, eyes drifting to the ceiling where cracks from the explosion still marred the surface. "We survived, Max. We fought. We held on to each other." She looked down at him again, her gaze full of gratitude and unspoken connection. But maybe that was just the beginning. Max tilted his head, then gently pressed his nose into her palm. A small gesture, but now it carried the weight of a vow. Not just to keep going, but to fight to the very end. Sarah stood, her eyes sharpening from affection into resolve. She saved the data, encrypted it under triple security, then called Rodriguez. "The feds need to see this, but I'm leading the next move." On the other end, his voice dropped low. "I figured you would. And if Max is back on his feet, I'm not going to stop you. But this time it's not just Atlanta." She nodded, eyes fixed on the window where the sunset stretched shadows across the floor like the horizon of a new frontier. "No," she said quietly. "This time it's the world." And just like that, while others believed the story had ended, with medals, applause, and ceremony, Sarah and Max had already stepped into a new chapter. A place where justice was no longer a job, but a mission. Where trust couldn't be misplaced again, and where the dog who carried the heart of a whole team was still walking forward, never looking back. The real war was just beginning. And so, from what seemed like a simple medal ceremony, Sarah and Max stepped into a future no one saw coming, filled with danger, betrayal, and brilliance lit by loyalty, courage, and an unshakable bond. From Max's first growl to the moment he stood beside Sarah wearing his honor, their journey had done more than save a department. It had awakened a force. And now, with even bigger secrets unfolding, they're already on the move again, side by side, like soldiers who never tire. Because justice doesn't wait. And what about you? If you were Sarah, would you have the courage to put your faith in someone who speaks not with words, but with absolute loyalty? Like Max? Tell us in the comments below. If Max's story moved you, hit like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story about loyalty, friendship, and silent heroes. Thank you for following, and we'll see you in the next mission.